Hello and welcome back to part 6 of modelling a Mustang in Fusion 360. We'll get straight into it. So at the moment I'm just touching up the front of the car using selection boxes. Using selection boxes from the vertical view doesn't really create any problems when you're grabbing such large areas, but using it from the side view or the rear to front view will create you a lot of problems. So only at this stage you should really only be using selection boxes when looking from a bird's eye perspective. So showing and hiding canvases can often expose a lot of problems. So what I'm doing here is I flash the canvas on and off, and I notice straight away at the front of the car there's something not quite right, and it becomes more obvious when you do show and hide your canvas. If you remain in canvas view, sometimes you assume that the lines in the canvas are lines you've done because they are quite faint. So yeah, by turning it on and off, it does help show and expose any kind of problems you face. So yeah, just touching that front bit up, it's just, again, it's not at its final stage, but just getting those points in a more convenient place where the lines are a bit smoother and they flow a bit better. It's just always beneficial. You don't want to kind of work on the front of the car to perfection, then work on the middle of the car. You want to gradually just go back and forth over the car and over the car, adjusting it and adjusting it, because you're less likely to create yourself errors. I mean, it's more time consuming that way, but it just functions better. So I believe I'm about to insert, so I'm attaching my third and final canvas into this model, which is the rear view. One thing I should say is you could have 4 canvases and do the top down view as well, and I mean, you would be more accurate with it. I've just never felt the need to. Usually I model cars that I've been obsessed with for ages, so I'm quite unlikely to get the kind of curvature at the front and the rear wrong. But you can just for added accuracy. I mean, to be honest, you could have an image to cover all 360 degrees along all 3 axes to model a car, and you'd nail it, but it would take you ages. So like I was saying, it's just a model that is as close as I can kind of achieve in a day. So yeah, rotating this model here just to make it as level as it can be. I mean, you could create a quick sketch and draw a line horizontal at like a certain point on the car, and that would be a really good way of making sure it was dead horizontal, but using your eye you're usually fine. So there, briefly calibrating that image, so clicking the 2 widest points and setting that as the width of the car that we've already found out. And now what I want to do is I want to just edit the canvas. I think I should do. Yeah, so the spoiler in the image is actually lower than the spoiler I've kind of, well, I say the spoiler, the kind of little lip at the back of the car is lower, so I need to raise the image, and I also need to move it to the left a bit, because I know that line of symmetry, the green line that appears in the middle, that should line up with the features of the car. I mean, it's actually just disappeared, but there was line of symmetry was appearing. So there we go. That's got that image nice and set in a position that I'm happy with. So now starting to model those edges. So here I'm not using a selection box, I'm just shift clicking, and the reason why that is because if I was to draw a selection box where I'm actually doing it now, it would also affect the front right corner of the car, because remember, selection boxes kind of select everything that lines up with kind of your view in that area. So this would line up from this angle with the front of the car. So by clicking those selection boxes, by clicking each box individually, or section, whatever you want to call them, or panel, I'm not going to interfere with any other geometry than the ones that are on the surface closest to me. So now, kind of just adjusting, using some selection boxes. So from a vertical point of view, it just doesn't affect because I've drawn that from like a bird's eye view. I'm only affecting the rear of the car. I'm not affecting anything that's not symmetrical, if you get what I mean. So from the car front to back is not symmetrical, or top to bottom is not symmetrical, but it's symmetrical side to side. So when you're looking at it from this vertical point, you're only affecting kind of things that are some features that are symmetric anyway. So you can still use selection boxes to draw from top down, but only on the edges. You wouldn't want to do it in the middle, like in the middle of the rear windscreen. You wouldn't want to draw a top down box, because then you'd affect something in the dead center of the bottom of the car, and you'd probably create yourself a problem. One thing I haven't actually really mentioned at this stage is the kind of importance of saving your work. So hang on. This briefly, I will get into saving your work, but briefly, I just want to say, so here, these dots that I'm selecting, they should line up with the bottom of the kind of white section of the car, from this point of view. But from the side point of view, they're actually higher. And so what kind of transpires in a second is that you have to decide which image you're kind of is going to be your main reference. So in parts where perhaps the images, just because of the lens they've been shot on, they might have like a greater perspective. You have to decide which image kind of has hierarchy or priority. For me, it's usually always the side image. They're usually taken on a kind of a longer lens. There's many more images of whatever car you're trying to find from a side-on point of view, than a front to back. So I always let the kind of side image dictate. See, it sits a bit low there. So see where the old line was. So now if I raise it back, there we go. And that's because for me the side image has hierarchy. So yeah, going back onto saving your work. Saving is extremely important. In kind of surface modeling, a lot of the time when you go to kind of finish form, it'll probably give you an error saying there's some self-intersecting geometry, and no matter how smart you are about a model, no matter how many times you've done it, like unless you're doing something really simple, it will probably come up. I mean, I don't get them so much anymore, but I'm fairly certain in the 9 cars that preceded this car, I always had something saying there's self-intersecting geometry, and then you have to go and fix it, and it is a nightmare. So by having kind of regular saves, you don't cause yourself this problem at all. Well, you still might get this problem, but then you can just go back to before the save and then figure out what you've done to cause that issue. But yeah, regular saving, dead important. Right. So I'd also mention on the car, those lines that run up and down and side to side and all around, it's important that they kind of have a nice flowing curve to them, that they're not zigzaggy, that everything flows well, because in kind of almost all production cars, it's always nice smooth lines. So by creating like smooth lines on even just here, it assures that the model's going to be just a lot better. It's just a good indicator of when a model's going to be successful. So there, briefly, what I did was I used a selection box from the top-down view, and that actually selected the underside of the car, which I hadn't thought about, but I've only just noticed now watching this video. So, like I was saying, it doesn't matter too much that we're taking it from a top-down point of view, but the fact that I just didn't even notice I was doing it, that can be kind of a dangerous habit that you don't want to kind of keep. So yeah, now just adjusting those sides. It's quite difficult to see. I mean, it's easier to see when you're full screen in Fusion, but I can see when I'm modelling at least that curve needs to be tighter. So naturally, when you put in a canvas, I think they always come in at 50% opacity. You can crank that right up to 100, or you can put it, well, you can put it to 0 if you wanted, but you wouldn't be able to see it. But maybe having a higher opacity if you're struggling to see where the kind of image, where the image is, just put the opacity up a bit, and that'll help you. Too high though, and then you start to not be able to see where your model is. Like say if I was doing it from a side view, it might be difficult to make out those lines because they'll be darker, and so they'll less likely show. But yeah, just an idea. So there, just trying to adjust that to a smoother curve. It's just it was just quite angular. So yeah, just moving those points just to create a little bit more of a natural curve, with a bit of tension in it. So yeah, tension in curves is just like, if you imagine a piece of string, and then if you pushed it together, it will like coil up and it has no tension in it at all. But if you like pull it fairly taut and like around your fingers or something, the curves kind of between it, that creates tension in those curves, and that's what you're looking to do with the car. So here, that looks a bit odd. Those lines are like that, and that, when you find self-intersecting geometry, it often looks a bit like that, a bit of a weird kind of line that doesn't look quite right. So try and fix it as early as possible. And you can tell if self-intersecting geometry is kind of in your model, because if you click finish form, you'll get an error that says there is self-intersecting geometry, and it usually highlights it in red. So you can easily see what's going wrong. The problem is being able to fix it is difficult. It's not impossible, but it's certainly difficult. Like I do know how to fix it depending on the case. Not all the time, but usually I'm fairly successful in being able to fix when I have self-intersecting geometry. Recently I was modelling a person's face. It's the first time I've done it. I've not seen anyone do it on Fusion before. I mean, it's difficult, but again, I found that it can be done in a day, but that did create a lot of self-intersecting geometry, and I spent, I don't know, at least 2 hours fixing geometry. So like I was saying, just create a lot of saves, and it's just easier to fix. Right, so see that line on the side of the car in the actual canvas? That is kind of kicked out. It's not a natural curve. It's actually got a crease to it. So in Fusion, there's a tool called Crease. So I want to select the lines that I want to kind of crease like you would a piece of paper when you pinch a fold. And you click modify. Well, you go in the drop-down menu for modify, click Crease. You've already selected the lines, and then all you have to do is click OK, and it changes that line that was once a gradual curve to, if you look from this angle, you'll see that it's a lot sharper. See there? It's not a right angle, but it has a crease to it, and that's what we want, because it's subtle features like that that really elevate your model. Like, you know, details everything really. Because without features like that, it's less. It just becomes a more generic kind of looking model. So it's things like that that really kind of just elevate it and make it look a lot more accurate. So yeah, and now what I'm doing, I'll just click on the points on that crease and just modify it and drag it down. So again, starting to line up with that the crease in the actual image. Elevate that, and that looks a lot better. So I think that's it for kind of this video. In the next one, I'm trying to think, it'll be a lot more minor editing, but perhaps we'll get into the tires. Anyway, that's it. Cheers.